Welcome to this episode of Rooted in the Word. I'm an African and I'm a Christian. Rooted in the Word takes us back to our roots and brings us to the Word of God. Come and join us in this journey to the truth. In this episode, we discuss worldviews. But before we do that, there's an interesting proverb waiting for us.
Our proverb is Rinemanyanga ariputirwe.
Rinemanyanga ariputiwe.
Yeah, correct.
Xhosa is better than this.
Well, you know what? At least there are no clicks. But really, what literally this means is that which has horns cannot be covered.
Okay.
If there is something with horns, you can try to protect it and cover it, but one time it will come out and people will see that this thing has horns.
Yes.
What we were talking, when the elders talked about this thing, they were trying to caution people that whatever you do in private, you may think that it will not come out, but it will come out. And most of the times, the ladies, the elderly ladies, like there is a gossip about maybe a girl is fallen pregnant and people are talking, they would say, hush, hush.
Wow.
Rinemanyanga hariputirwe. Meaning, 9 months is coming. 6 months is coming. Very soon, it will show. And whatever you discuss, whatever you do, whatever sin you commit, you must always remember, whether it's in the darkest of the valleys, one day is going to come out. And you know, one funny thing is, in the Bible, there is something about that.
But just before you get there, I noticed something that, you know, the forefathers, the elderly people were very brilliant. They would actually look at something and come up with a proverb.
True.
Idiom.
True.
Out of it.
True.
Sure.
True.
And they were not educated.
True. And you know, as I was saying, when we go to the Bible, Luke 8 verse 17, it says, for there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known or brought out into the open. So before you get into anything, before you do anything, just remember, how will I feel when my friends, when my family know about this? Rinemanyanga hariputiwe.
In our discussion in this program, we have Dr. Gwala, who is the head of the theology faculty at Helderberg College near Cape Town. Welcome, Doctor.
Thank you.
What would you consider to be your cultural background?
This is always an interesting question. I'm an African and I belong to the Nguni cluster.
That's interesting. We have another guest, Brother Thula Nkosi, who is an education consultant. He lives in Johannesburg. Welcome, Brother Thula.
Thank you.
Where were you born?
I was born in South Africa, specifically in Johannesburg.
On this program, we are discussing the issue of worldviews. How does an individual, a community, or a tribe develop a worldview? How does the Word of God shape our worldview? Let me begin with Dr. Gwala. Could you define for us just the term itself, worldview?
The term worldview is one of the most interesting terms. I haven't discovered one unified definition. And I've also not discovered a definition that has consensus. But for the purpose of this discussion in this show, I will put it in a very simple way. A worldview is a spectacle that one uses to view the world. The spectacle could be green, and at the end you will see a green world. It could be yellow, you could be seeing a yellow world. But that's how you will view the world.
Thank you. Brother Thula, what would be your definition, a simple definition of the term worldview?
Well, in current modern scholarship, a worldview is a collective of ideas about the world and how life should be lived within that perspective. But in the context of the discussion we're having now, relevant to African life, a worldview is not a concept. It is a lived reality developed over centuries of communal life, one which informs the people's activities, their religious practices, and social relations.
Thank you. We asked members of the community to give us their understanding and definition of the term worldview.
Okay, according to my little knowledge, I think the worldview, the term worldview, I think it just defines itself because it is the way I view the world. It is the way I see things around me. It is the way I am able to define things around me and how, just generally how I see the world.
Well, a worldview is a point of departure or a perspective which gives us meaning in life. It presents us with a point of departure, and it's a set of beliefs that we are able to live by on a day-to-day basis.
My understanding of the term worldview is the way that I perceive culture, my belief system, my values and norms. It could be negative, it could be positive, but in general it's my framework of the way that I would use as a tool perhaps to interpret and interact with the world directly around me.
A worldview is the eyes through which an individual views the world. For example, I can use the example of rain. Some people would believe that rain, if they need rain, they need to pray to God and God sends rain to them. Some people who believe in ancestors and they would pray for rain from their ancestors, and they will believe then that the ancestor is the one who has made it possible for them to receive rain. And scientists would probably not believe that it's God who sent the rain. They'll just say that's just a natural process of things. So there are different eyes in viewing the world, and that is an individual's worldview.
I'd say worldview is acceptable norms according to your own perspective that are cross-cultural and what you perceive to be the right thing to do considering every other person and what you've seen in your life. I think that's what I define as my worldview, what I make out of everything that I know about different types of people and their morals and norms and so forth.
We'll come back after the break. Don't go away. We continue with our discussion, worldviews. We're looking at how a person develops a worldview, an individual, a tribe, a community, or a nation, and how the Word of God shapes this worldview. Dr. Gwala, you did mention that the worldview can be a set of spectacles. Can you expound on that?
we have spectacles that are from a Western philosophy, looking at life in a structured way, looking at life in a defined and in a way that has been scientifically proven. We also have a spectacle from an African philosophy where you don't have life in a structured way, you don't have life being defined, you have experience as a test for life. Therefore, you don't move from theory to life, to experience, you move from experience to theory. Therefore, the theories that are there in an African setting are actually tested, even though in a Western mind, they may not have been scientifically proven. But in an African mind, they are working, they have worked, and they will continue to work.
That's very interesting. Sounds very interesting. Brother Thula, what would be your comment on that?
What has just been said is confirmable from the fact that African life does not have orthodox theories. Theory is the manifestation of a life validated by a long-range experience of a particular phenomenon which yields consistent results over a period of time, which then becomes the template on which life can be prescribed or lived.
So you're saying in the African mind, or rather the Western worldview,
Right.
it's structured,
Right.
it's proven, it's tested, maybe through debate and other aspects of life. But you're saying in the African sphere, the worldview develops out of a life experience.
Certainly.
When they have experienced several things over time with the same results, they now develop that kind of worldview. Now, let's look at some inherent misconceptions. We are talking about faith here. We are talking about being rooted in the Word. Tell me something. Could it be that these worldviews actually could have tensions? What could be some of the tensions in these worldviews?
First of all, probably let's go back to the time of the missionaries. And in the time of missionaries, you are taking people from a different worldview to come and evangelize people from another worldview. The first thing that you have done, you have actually taken those people out of their comfort zone. And even those that are evangelized are actually feeling trapped because they are dealing with someone who is not from their own cultural understanding. That's the first challenge that you have. The second challenge is that we seem to have different ways of looking at things. In the West, a concept precedes an experience. In Africa, an experience precedes a concept. For instance, when it comes to singing, in an African setting, I need to feel the song, and the song is informed by my experiences. In a Western thinking, the song, when it's there, it has its notes, which I need to learn, and I need to sing in a particular way. It has a particular way of annotation and all those things. Therefore, there are systems that are guiding that song. But in an African setting, my experiences are guiding the song.
So in an African setting, you are saying, Dr. Gwala, it is not your mouth that is singing, not the mind, but actually your life
Yes.
is singing. Brother Thula, what would you say as to the challenges that maybe a missionary could have faced when coming to evangelize within the African context?
Right. One of the fundamental flaws in the missionary process was in destroying conceptual bridges between an existent worldview and the worldview to which the African was being invited to participate. There were a number of areas, some of which were not just defects, but assaults, so to say. The assault on self-identity was one of them. Africans had to be renamed, and they were not necessarily given names that were associated with God, but with the culture of and sociology of the missionary. Mm-hmm. There was also a presumption that the African was being moved from darkness to light. So there was a failure to realize that God existed in the traditional thought of the African people. That was one of that is one of these are some of the tensions that arose. Of course, they resulted into a lot of other things. Ultimately, you find what are called today the African initiated churches, whose historical rootage comes from some of those flaws. Yeah.
Are you saying the development of these African churches could have been a reaction or a resistance? A resistance from, resisting to be changed from this experiential worldview to an instructional worldview? Could it have been a resistance to say, look, in order to keep our roots, our cultural roots and our cultural identity, let us blend this Western cultured Christianity to what we can accommodate? Could that have been a reaction to that?
It could have been a reaction, but I think we should look beyond that. Africans, by definition, are religious in nature. Now, I think this is one area which was a challenge to missionaries, because they thought that they were dealing with people who are in darkness. And the second thing which I also need to highlight here is that the issue of a name in Africa is very important. A name is actually reflecting on experiences that this family or this nation has gone through. Now, changing that name, you're actually undermining the entire African system.
Well, thank you very much. Let's go for a break. We'll come back. Don't go away. Welcome back. Dr. Gwala, you were touching a very important point on the issue of naming. Can you expand on that?
As I stated earlier on, in an African setting, when you name a child, that name reminds you of the experiences that the family has gone through. And the child needs to live up to those expectations or experiences that the family had. Maybe I just need to add one more thing here, that in an African setting, 3 things are very important. You have the land. An African will fight until he or she dies for a land. And then you have a family. In an African setting, you don't have an individual. We make decisions as a family, and no one can just make a decision of doing anything. That's why missionaries had challenges in converting people, because if you convert one person, that person must still go and ask permission at home. And the third thing that is also important when it comes to the issue of African worldview is the name. Therefore, those 3 things are actually touching to the core of an African, which I think was a great challenge for the missionaries.
What I'm getting from you is that the African worldview is developed from experience. When the Word of God comes to me with my deep experience, should I be transplanted so that I develop roots into the Word of God? Or should God actually plant, or should the Word be planted in my experience?
The missionary had a serious challenge with his worldview. It imprisoned him and blinded him or her from seeing that his or her worldview was not necessarily a biblical worldview, but a social construct from his primary community. In failing to separate the two, he presented a gospel coached within a view which was not biblical. And so the African had to be brought into that worldview together with the faith that was being transmitted. And so we have what one would call a hybrid type of faith, resulting in a split level spirituality. On one hand, there is what I would call the central view, the texts, the Bible. Then there's the surrounding, there's a dialectical relationship now between that worldview to which he was actually being brought into, the salvation paradigm, and his primary worldview, which keeps barking at him because he has been moved away from something fundamental in his life and mind to something which is coached in the worldview of another, quoted in the worldview of another. And that has created a split level spirituality. And so you find what a man like Reverend Makubu calls in the book, Who Are the Independent Churches, a convert who is liked by the missionary during the day, but who goes to other things during the night, calls him an underground Christian.
That's quite interesting. Dr. Gwala, if when the word comes to me as a person, how should it shape my worldview? Is it possible that I can be so ingrained in my experiential worldview that I actually refuse transformation?
Thank you very much. Probably letting on what has already been said, it is important to know that Africans are a people who are first of all religious, and you will also notice that there is an element of being syncretic in their approach. Therefore, if you create the ground for them to have the two views, the corporate view and an individual view, Africans will embrace that. And I think the challenge then is, once you talk about transplanting, then you create a problem. You move the plant from this end to another end, probably with its soil, and not just taking the plant and planting it in another area without using the soil of the other area. Now the problem then is transplanting. I would rather use the word transforming, because when Christ invites me to join the community of faith, he invites me as an African. Mm-hmm. He does not expect me to change who I am, but he expects me to change my roots. In other words, my source of power will no longer be the African source of power, will now be Christ's source of power. But because I have that source of power now, my views, my experiences are actually transformed to be in line with Christ. In an African setting, when you're talking about a word, the Bible means nothing if it cannot be lived. Mm. Therefore, if we want to be sure that something is happening in an African setting, you will be told that Mr. So-and-so's son has been living what you are telling us today. Therefore, his experiences are actually equated to the word. Therefore, in an African setting, you are not just saying, I'm a Christian or I have met Jesus. People want to see what has he done for you and how have you lived for this Jesus. Therefore, living informs your faith.
Thank you very much. You are saying my worldview, my experiential worldview as an African is transformed by myself experiencing Christ, and also seeing living examples of those who have experienced Christ. As an African whose worldview develops from experience, when Christ comes into my heart, he does not transplant me. He transforms me to the root of my worldview. This is a blessing. See you next time.